Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Atmanexus episode 4. I'm your host, Sid, and as always, I'm joined by my dear friend Jude. Welcome back, Jude.
Thank you, Siddharth. It's nice to see you.
Same here. So, today's conversation is one that has fascinated philosophers and many people for centuries. And it's one of those questions that sounds quite simple, yet the more deeply you look into it, the more mysterious it becomes. If I'm not my thoughts, if I'm not my emotions, then who am I? Now, before we begin, I'd like to invite all of you listening to this podcast to pause for a moment and think, have you ever noticed that your thoughts never stay the same? One moment you are very happy, the next moment you're anxious. One day you're full of confidence, another day you're doubting yourself. The same is true for emotions. They rise, they fall, sometimes they overwhelm us. Sometimes they disappear without us even realizing when they left. And yet, through all these changing thoughts and changing emotions, there seems to be something that never changes. Can you guess what it is? Or have these questions ever crossed your mind? Or I would say, have we become so busy living our thoughts that we have forgotten to ask, who is the one experiencing these thoughts? So today's episode isn't about giving you answers, it's about inviting you into an inquiry. Because sometimes a sincere question can transform us far more deeply than a ready-made answer. So Jude, shall we begin?
Yes, let's begin.
So Jude, I'd like to begin with perhaps the most fundamental question. People often say you are not your thoughts. We hear this quite often. Even we ask ourselves quite a lot many times. So it sounds profound, but for some people hearing it for the first time, it can be quite confusing. So what does that really mean? If I'm not my thoughts, then who am I?
Anything that changes is not you. All that we are aware of can never be us, right? Anything that we're aware of or that we can experience or that is transitory cannot be who we are, because we are the experiencer of all of these different experiences, right? I'm sure when people listening to this are able to look at their lives, right? We've all been a child, been to school, had different jobs, lived in different places. All of those external things have changed in our lives, but we have remained the same. The fixed point of the experiencer, we were there present in all of those moments and all of those different experiences, completely unharmed and unchanged by any of the experiences. And for people, when hearing this for like the first time, I would invite them just to look, right? Look how you feel today compared to how you felt yesterday. Or just sit still for 5 minutes with your eyes open or eyes closed, sitting still, not moving, not acting, not doing anything, not using your phone, sitting still and just observe the stream of thoughts. Maybe it'll be a barrage of different thoughts that come and go, that arise and disappear, right? Most of the time in life, when we are busy, we just become a slave to our thoughts. We are acting on lots of our thoughts and living at this frantic, fast pace. But as soon as you stop, as soon as you sit still and just observe your thoughts, just that process in and of itself starts to create separation between you as awareness or the observer of your thoughts and emotions and the thoughts and emotions themselves. So it's not something to be understood in the mind. or understood intellectually, because that is just another thought. Trying to understand what thoughts are by thinking about thoughts, that's just going to lead you down a spiral of more thinking. It just takes some time every day to sit and do nothing. And just doing that process, you cannot help but start to see slowly the separation between you, the observer, and you and your thoughts.
That's so profound, because most of us don't merely have thoughts, we become them. The moment a thought appears saying, I'm not good enough, we immediately believe it's telling us the truth. So, which brings me to another question. How do we know the difference between simply experiencing a thought and becoming identified with it? Where does that identification begin?
I think identification with the thought starts when you believe it to be true and you have a psychosomatic response to the thought. For example, the example you gave of I am not good enough, if you think that thought and then you internalize that and feel that within the body, and you feel yourself almost shrink and become small, that is being a slave to that thought, believing that thought to be true. Whereas if you just sit there and you have that thought and you're completely unaffected by the thought, you're just like, oh, that's an interesting thought. I wonder where that came from. And maybe you smile at the thought, maybe you laugh at the thought, maybe you just let the thought go and it's forgotten. So it's not about stopping thought or not having thoughts, but I think a fundamental part of this conversation is changing our relationship with our thoughts. Maybe my language is wrong and they are not our thoughts, they are just thoughts which appear and disappear.
And it leads me to wonder about emotions now. Because while thoughts come and go quickly, emotions often feel much more personal. If thoughts aren't who we are, what about emotions? Fear, love, anger, grief, joy. These feel incredibly real. So, can we also say that we are not our emotions? Or is there something deeper observing even those?
Yes, absolutely. Anything that changes is not you. So of course we are not our thoughts and we are not our emotions. It feels so real in the moment and when we're swept up in our emotions, but it always passes. Anything that comes and goes is not who we truly are. We are the awareness of the peak of the wave and also the trough. We are there regardless, nevertheless. And it's very easy to get addicted to the highs, to get addicted to the peaks. But we all go through the troughs at some points in life.
If I talk about my life, I've noticed something quite a lot many times. Whenever I try to suppress a thought or push away an emotion, it often seems to grow even stronger, which makes me wonder, is freedom found by controlling the mind or by simply observing it? What role does awareness play in all of this, Jude?
I see a connection again to our conversation about nature, about how in nature everything is effortless. There is no suppression in nature. There is no forcing or striving or really huge effort. So I think that whenever we're fighting with our mind or our thoughts or trying to control our thoughts or suppress our thoughts, we're opposing the natural flow of nature.
That brings us to a word that many spiritual traditions often use, the observer or the witness. And it's a beautiful idea, but it's also easy to turn it into another concept. So, when people speak about the observer, what are they really pointing towards? Is it something we have to achieve, or is it something that's already present but often overlooked?
It's always present. It is always with every single one of us all of the time. It's our innate nature. I think what you're touching on is presence, is present moment awareness. And when you're fully in the present moment, nothing else exists outside of this moment. And the more time you spend in a state of presence, the more apparent it becomes how silly it is to live in other states. Like presence is, and living in the present moment is a fundamental part of all spiritual teachings.
And I feel once you start becoming aware and you just be an observer, life becomes quite interesting. You feel contentment. I have touched that state a lot of times, but yes, coming back to normal life, then everything becomes so normal. But when you just take yourself as an observer, that state is a complete bliss. Have you ever experienced such a state in you, Jude?
Yes, many times. But anything I say about it now is not the state, is not the experience.
The mind, it produces thoughts just as the heart pumps blood, and thinking it's simply one of its functions. But if you sit quietly and just observe, you'll notice that thoughts arise on their own. You don't consciously manufacture every thought, they just appear, remain for a while, and disappear. And the interesting question isn't who is thinking, but rather who is aware that thinking is happening. And that awareness doesn't seem to come and go like thoughts, it simply witnesses them. And whereas if I talk about our emotions, emotions often feel even more personal than our thoughts. When I'm angry, I say I'm angry. When I'm sad, I say I'm sad. So do emotions define who we are, or they are also experiences that pass through us? Do you feel emotions are more stronger than thoughts?
Maybe. I don't know. I think that's a very good question. I think that people have to decide that for themselves. From my lived experience, I think that thoughts and emotions are unentangably linked, right? Thoughts create emotions and emotions create thoughts. Thought and emotion are in constant relationship. Thinking a thought can create an emotion within the body. Feeling, say, the emotion of fear and anxiety within the body often comes hand in hand with a very anxious, fearful, overthinking mind. But to me, they come hand in hand, and one leads to the other, or they come together. Everyone's experience will be different because we've all had different experiences, and our body and mind has been conditioned in different ways. No other human being on the planet will experience the way you experience the world because no one has had the same experiences and conditioning that you have. So I think like the nature of this conversation is that it's an inquiry, but really what we're encouraging people to do is to look within themselves and to become curious about their own nature, about the inner workings of their own body and mind, because really that's where the answers are. The answers are all within ourselves and found through understanding ourselves more deeply. The answers are not, you're not going to get the answers prescribed to you by listening to this podcast or any other podcast or reading all the books in the world. You can read all the books in the world and you'll become a fantastic intellectual theorist, but where the real inner transformation is in embodiment and lived experience. And the nature of this conversation is that it's an inquiry. It's not to give anyone prescribable answers, but it's if this conversation helps people become more curious and more curious about their internal state of being and the connection between their body, their mind, their emotions, their nervous system, their digestive system. If people can start to see and feel the interconnectedness of everything inside ourselves and outside ourselves and explore it for themselves, then I think this conversation has been very worthwhile.
So, from your conversation, I feel conditioning plays a very important role in everybody's life. And that's why they see things differently. And talking about the emotions, if you ask me, emotions are quite real and they deserve to be felt rather than suppressed. But they are temporary. Fear eventually fades, joy fades, grief transforms, love itself evolves in expression. If everything emotional changes, then perhaps it cannot be the permanent self. So, the one who notices the changing emotions may be closer to our true nature than the emotions themselves.
Yes.
So, for all the people listening today, what's one simple practice they can begin that helps them experience this observer directly instead of merely understanding it as an idea? Because we have talked about the witness or the observer as the essence of this conversation. So, Jude, I would basically like to know your personal things, experiences, or examples, what you do to just observe the emotions rather not be the emotions or thoughts. What do you practice in your daily life?
I find observing my breath very, very helpful in this regard, because the breath and observing the breath anchors you in the present moment. And for example, one style of meditation that I do is that I sit or I stand or I walk and I observe my breath. And then I notice whenever I've become distracted or identified with thought or emotion, I notice what has happened and then bring my attention back to the breath. And like there are many, many different practices that I do, but I don't want to like give the practices that I do in order like for people to copy, because I don't actually think it's necessarily about the practices, or different people, different things will work for different people. But I've done many, many different things that have all been part of my spiritual journey, like dance, gymnastics, martial arts, fishing, nature, traveling, meditation, yoga, tai chi, singing, dancing, silent retreats, long fasts. I've done all of these different things and they've all been part of my journey in different ways. I think that conscious practices would be the sort of blanket advice that I would give. And anything which you can practice or interact with in a conscious manner, be it observing your breath, be it meditation, be it yoga, tai chi, somatic movement therapy, talking therapy, any of those things can be helpful in all of our own journeys. But a huge part of it is all these distinct practices are just preparing us for life. So yoga is not just spending an hour on the mat or going to a yoga class and then you've done your yoga for the day. That 1 hour of yoga is preparation for the other 17 or 18 hours that you're awake that day. The being an embodiment of yoga all of the time and in everything that you do is the practice of yoga, and practicing it on the mat in a very concentrated, conscious way helps us to practice yoga throughout our lives. So I would say, like, for people, don't look for like any one solution or savior. The only person and the only thing that can save you is yourself, is your consciousness. And you go on that journey far enough, eventually you will not need or rely on anything outside of yourself. All of these things are just tools.
So beautifully explained and conveyed. So, my dear friends, the next time a thought arises, don't judge it or chase it. Simply just pause and ask, who is aware of this thought? Don't search for a verbal answer, just remain with silence that follows. Do the same with emotions. Instead of saying, I am anxious, try noticing anxiety is being experienced. That small shift, it actually creates a space. And within that space, many people begin to discover a peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. Perhaps that peace isn't something we create. Perhaps it's what remains when we stop identifying with everything that comes and goes. So, this brings me to the end of our podcast today. Jude, I would like you to sum up the whole topic in few words.
There's a very common phrase in meditation that anything that changes is not you. And to really look at this and to look at all of the things that have changed throughout your life and all of the things that are changing within your body and mind today or right now. And having little anchors that bring you back to the present moment can be very good, like closing your eyes for a moment or taking 3 conscious breaths and being aware of your breath. Or when you notice that you're getting stressed, breaking the cycle early and actually stepping away. Notice that I'm experiencing stress and actually take a break for 5 minutes and do something which calms you. And I also think that language can be very helpful in having these self-inquiries with ourselves. When you experience emotion, to go from saying, I am anxious. Alternatively, I would choose to say, I am experiencing anxiety. I am experiencing anger within my body. So just that simple shift in language from I am angry to I am experiencing anger within my body creates separation between you, the observer, and the emotion itself.
So beautifully summed up. And a big thank you, Jude. As always, this wasn't a conversation meant to convince everyone. It was simply an invitation to inquire together. And to everyone listening, perhaps don't rush to answer today's question. Instead, carry it with you. The next time a thought arises or an emotion takes over, just pause for a moment and gently ask yourself, who is aware of this experience? You don't need to force an answer, just stay with the question. Because I feel sometimes the deepest discoveries are born not from thinking more, but from observing more. So, thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of Atmanexus. And if this conversation resonated with you, we would love to hear your reflections in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning, keep observing, and keep discovering. Thank you and take care.